A librarian in a small French town discovered a trapdoor in the basement of an old library she worked in. It was hidden beneath a pile of ancient books and hadn't been touched in decades, maybe centuries. Curious, she decided to investigate during her break. Armed with a flashlight, she descended a narrow stone staircase leading into an underground corridor. The air was thick and damp, carrying a faint metallic scent. The librarian found herself in what seemed like an old catacomb. There were alcoves carved into the walls, some still containing skeletal remains. Though unnerving, the bones seemed centuries old. At first, she assumed it was merely a forgotten burial site, common in European history. But as she ventured further, strange carvings began to appear on the walls, symbols that didn't match any religious iconography she was familiar with. The deeper she went, the more the air grew heavy, and an odd pressure built in her chest, making it harder to breathe. She decided to turn back, but her flashlight began flickering, and the path she had just walked seemed different. Where the staircase should have been, there was now a solid wall. Panic set in. She hurried down the corridor, hoping to find another way out. That's when she heard footsteps, light and deliberate, as though someone was following her. She called out, but the only response was the echo of her own voice. Then came whispers, growing louder and louder until they seemed to be coming from the walls themselves. The flashlight finally gave out, plunging her into complete darkness. In the pitch black, she felt something cold brush against her arm. Screaming, she bolted forward, stumbling through the corridor until her hands found a wooden door. She pushed it open and emerged, back in the library's basement, with the trapdoor shut firmly behind her. To this day, she swears she was only gone for 20 minutes, but her co-workers told her she'd been missing for over 2 hours. No one could explain the time discrepancy or how the librarian's flashlight, now back in her possession, had completely corroded in those 2 hours. A young couple bought an old farmhouse in rural Pennsylvania, excited to start their lives together. While cleaning out the basement, they found a locked door they hadn't noticed during the initial walkthrough. The previous owners hadn't mentioned it, and the real estate agent had no record of it either. The lock was rusted shut, but the husband, curious, pried it open with a crowbar. Behind the door was a small, windowless room with walls painted black. In the center of the room sat a wooden chair, nailed to the floor. Chains hung from the ceiling, ending in cuffs that appeared to be for holding someone's wrists. Carved into the walls were strange symbols and a single word repeated over and over: stay. The couple was horrified and quickly sealed the door back up, planning to call a contractor to investigate. That night, strange things began happening. They heard faint tapping noises coming from the basement. At first, they thought it was pipes settling, but the tapping grew louder and more rhythmic, like deliberate knocking. The next morning, they found the basement door wide open, even though they were sure they'd locked it. The air inside was freezing, and they swore they could hear whispers coming from the locked room. That evening, the husband decided to place a camera in the basement to catch whatever was causing the disturbances. The footage was chilling. Around 2 a.m., the camera picked up faint movement, shadows passing in and out of the locked room. The chains in the ceiling began swinging on their own, and a low, guttural growl could be heard. Then, suddenly, the camera feed cut to static. Terrified, the couple decided to sell the house. Before they moved out, the husband went to retrieve the camera. He found it shattered on the basement floor, and the door to the locked room was open again, despite being resealed. Scrawled across the inside of the door was a single word: stay. In London, a university student named Emma moved into a rental home with a surprisingly affordable price. The landlord explained the basement was off-limits, but Emma didn't think much of it. She was just happy to have found cheap housing in an expensive city. The door to the basement was padlocked, and Emma respected the rule, assuming it was being used for storage. A few weeks in, Emma started noticing odd things. Her food would disappear from the fridge, and small objects like keys and jewelry seemed to go missing. At first, she thought she was just being forgetful, but one night, She heard strange noises, soft, shuffling footsteps and the sound of something dragging across the floor. The noises always seemed to come from beneath her, directly below her bedroom. Unable to shake the feeling someone might be living in the basement, Emma called the landlord, but he insisted the basement was empty. Frustrated, she decided to investigate. Late one night, she took a hammer and broke the padlock. What she found left her shaking. The basement was set up like a crude living space, with a mattress on the floor, piles of canned food, and a bucket for waste. Someone had been living there, but there was no sign of them now. Scrawled on the walls in charcoal were crude drawings of eyes, all staring at a stick figure that looked eerily like Emma. Panicked, she ran upstairs and called the police. While she waited, she noticed something even more chilling. One of the basement walls had a small hole drilled into it, giving the occupant a clear view of her bedroom. The police conducted a thorough search but found no one. Emma stayed with a friend while breaking her lease. A month later, she received a call from the landlord, furious that the padlock had been broken. He claimed it had cost him, another tenant. Emma never found out what he meant, but she never felt safe living alone again.